the hiring manager called our clients mongrels. And I was like, holy moly. My mom, she had gotten severe nerve damage. She actually wasn't able to work anymore. She got thrown on government assistance, grew up on food stamps, Section 8, you name it, I was probably on it. Wow, imagine how different my life would have been.
I'm Travis Purdy, an alcoholic in recovery dedicated to giving back to the community that saved me. Join me and my incredible guests on our mission to break the stigma around mental health. One conversation at a time. This is Listen to Your Heart. Welcome back to Listen to Your Heart, a mental health show from a mental health company. My name is Travis Purdy, and today we have a guest, awesome guest. She means a lot to me. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later in the episode, but she's my first healthcare coworker, and she has grown into becoming a supervisor for a team of people that help people in our community with job skills, training, help them get into the workforce, sustain jobs. It's vocational training. That's what she does. Her name is Gabby Chu. She works for an awesome company called Abilities Unlimited, located here in Honolulu, Hawaii. Gabby, welcome to the show.
Hi, Trav. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, super glad I love catching up with you outside of recording, so I'm glad we get to do this on this show because I think there's a lot of value you have in your experiences to share with our audience. So that intro I gave is about what you do now, like the job you have now. But, tell us about how you got into behavioral health, like why is the field, mental health services, why does that mean so much to you, and how'd you end up in here?
For sure. Thank you so much. So I'd like to go as far back as possible. I like to tell everybody I'm pretty much an open book when it comes to talking about mental health, how I got into the field and how important it is to me, and also the other people around me, including family, friends, and the community that we serve as professionals. So even before I wanted to focus in behavioral health, mental health, and even vocational rehabilitation, I knew coming from a young age, I wanted to be in a profession that will allow me to help others. And at that time, I necessarily didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So as a kid, of course, your thoughts of what you want to do when you become adult changes all the time. And so when I was a little kid in elementary school, I thought, hey, I wanted to be like a veterinarian, because I always had a love for animals and people. And then I found out that sometimes when animals aren't feeling well, and there's nothing else to do, right, then it's the vet's duty to, put the animal down. And to me, that was something that I knew I couldn't handle. And so I did a lot of really exploration in myself and what I wanted to do as I got older. And so when I started working at, it was medical arts clinic at that time, with my pediatrician, actually, who I've known since literally I was born. And while I was in elementary school, we do. I know. Yes, I still keep in touch with him, checking in with him pretty frequently. So it's always good to, be kept in touch with somebody like him and someone like you folks. And so even before I was old enough to actually hold my first job, I did a lot of volunteer and shadowing with him in at medical arts. And so, when I got to that age where I could finally work and I knew I wanted to work somewhere in kind of the health field, I had, applied to work at medical arts clinic. And then a few years into it, that's how I met you and Dr. Wright. And it was a couple of years, right, where I went from doing reception work to working more with pediatrics, family medicine, and then I got moved up to behavioral health with you folks. And that really opened my eyes as to what the support would be like for our community out there, specifically for, the lower income individuals who don't have the support as others might have, right? So that really opened my eyes up. And, at that time, I was still going to college and I was doing a lot of exploration while I was meeting with counselors in college. And we started talking about vocational rehabilitation. And what I found out about that was, that is geared for helping individuals with barriers. It can be a intellectual disability, a physical disability, and from there, the specialist, the counselor, would work with disability adjustment with their clients and then help them identify what their passion is for work. And from there, we then help them develop, work readiness skills to eventually help them work in a competitive and integrated setting. And I thought, okay, combining both mental health and vocational rehabilitation was the star thing. It was the key thing that our industry needed, which was, why I had finished, school and, wanted to have that focus in mental health as well as what I do. So while I was, going to school and everything, right, we were kind of doing some digging as to, why my passion was in vocational rehabilitation. And, I tell a lot of people, right, and this includes, some of the people that I work with, as far as clientele, even my interns or new coworkers, right, when they ask, well, what got you into this field? And it was actually my mom. So my mom, she had gotten a severe nerve damage when she got the epidural when she was giving birth to me. And so the nerve damage was actually so bad that she actually wasn't able to work anymore. She would if she did too much heavy lifting, right, then she would have severe weakness in her arms and her shoulders and her back. And so back then, this was over 2 decades ago, coming up on three. Vocational rehabilitation wasn't a huge thing as it is now. As even mental health, right? Prioritizing mental health wasn't a huge thing back then. And so back then, people were very frowned upon or they were just put on government assistance. And that's actually what really happened to my mom during that time was she got thrown on government assistance. And there was really never anybody that had tried to do that disability adjustment counseling with her, and even try to push her to seek employment that would fit what her limitations are. And so I grew up on the system, right? Grew up on food stamps, Section 8, you name it, I was probably on it. And so when I found out about vocational rehabilitation, it opened up my eyes and pretty much, I was like, wow, imagine how different her life would have been, my life would have been, and even other people in similar situations, right? If they had that support and going forward, because that support is just increasing now, a lot of people in that situation, they'll be able to identify what their passion is and help actually reach that goal.
Yeah. You know what? I've not heard, or I don't recall that piece of the story, because when we met, and I plan to talk about that a little more later. I remember you going to school for vocational rehabilitation counseling, and me as a newbie to healthcare, I had no idea what that was. And it's so funny now over the years, seeing how it integrates into our society, especially locally here at our community. In fact, I was just at a resource fair and DVR was there, like the state DVR folks. Their table was kind of near ours. Yeah, and that was very cool. So like with the nature, what you mentioned about interns. I know that sounds like you take interns. Am I right? You supervise some interns. I wanted to ask you about like your path as an intern, right? Because my understanding of school for the program that you guys all kind of go on is like bachelor's, master's, and then if you want to pursue licensure, or some people go doctorate and then licensure or whatever. Tell me about like your practicum and intern experience. I've heard a variety of stories over the years.
Yes, for sure. So specifically, my practicum and internship experiences while I was in grad school was my first practicum. I did it with you folks, with Imola Health Group. And I had done it under Brandy at that time. And I would love to actually open up as to why I wanted to do it with that population. And it was because, my father was actually incarcerated since I was one for the exact same reason that the SOAR individuals are seeking, rehabilitation services for
Treatment.
new folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, that really, like, I just love knowing that there's so many other people out there, that want to better their lives, right? And I want to see them strive for that. And so that was one of the hugest reasons why I wanted to work with SOAR and, the SOAR individuals. And so I did my practicum with you folks, and it was, like group therapy with Brandy. And, in the beginning, she would take the lead, right? And then we would debrief about what the plan was for each session. And I never really did a lot of digging actually into their cases. And reason being is because I never like to have a bias as to what happened or what they're diagnosed with or anything like that. I like to get to know each person that I provide services for once I get to meet them, and I have them open up to me before I actually start doing more digging. And it's just because, like I said, I don't want to have a bias. And then I want to also give them that chance, of being a new person, a fresh person, right? And I want them to feel like, they can trust who they're talking to. And over time, I had started to lead more of the sessions and whatnot, and develop what I would say is a professional relationship with the individuals that we worked with, because I started to see the rapport building and I started to see them opening up to me and actually talking about their cases with me. And that was, to me, that was, fascinating when they open up, right? That is a huge sign of that trust starting. And
Right.
that's kind of how like you're gonna have a good professional relationship with your clientele. And I loved it, because even though I wasn't there from the beginning and I was only there for a semester, I really thought, what I had learned, and what I learned, not just from the clientele, but from Emo Health Group was very beneficial for me as a student and, starting my career as an entry-level counselor.
You know what? I swear this was not meant to prop up Imua. It was, I swear, it was not meant to do that. It's just like over the years that I've been working with therapists, I've met a lot of them that have really great supportive internship and practicum experiences where they just, so valuable to them, even a decade or two later. And then I've met some where they get that other experience, where they're kind of just like the gopher, right? Like,
Yeah.
they just get to go do all the things that nobody else wants to do, and they don't, necessarily have a lot of like clinical experience because either their supervisor or the site or whatever. I mean, they didn't allow them enough one-on-one or whatever the case. So it always kind of hurts my heart when I hear those type of bad experiences, because for me, I believe in the field and I believe in the field expanding, and we already, as behavioral health people, we already have a hard enough time getting people to want to come do this work. So I just feel like it's very important to treat our students and our interns and even our employees, like all of it, right? Everybody's, we got to try and create an environment that best supports what they're into, how they want to help people. So like you talked about with vocational rehabilitation counseling, and just, yeah, if we set people up early, then that'll give them the next best chance to learn more, do more. And then our hope is we have people that want to be in the field as their career forever, right? Until they want to retire or whatever the case. It's always a little sad when people leave the field because they just get burnt out of it, because they had a heart for the work, and it's just all of it just kind of, became too much. So they end up doing something else.
For sure. Yeah. And, like you said, Trav, it all starts with that practicum and internship experience, right? If they're not allowed the direct hours that they need, or the one-on-one, the support from, not just getting their hours, because that's one thing, right? Going to school, setting the foundations, getting your direct, indirect hours, yes, are all part of graduating, but really what sets us up for success is having that support from the employer that we're doing our practicum or internship with. And, I am lucky to say that all of the sites that I did my practicum and internship experiences with, I had that great relationship with the business that I never once felt like, okay, this isn't for me, right? I didn't have the support. And because, it started off slow, it wasn't like, okay, this is your first day of practicum or internship, I'm going to throw you out there and you'll have this caseload. It was like every person that I had worked under, I felt the support from day one. And I felt that really helped with the success that I had throughout school and even leading up to where I'm at now.
So great.
So yeah, it's fantastic.
And how did you end up at Abilities? Tell us about that.
Yeah. Yes. So I from my memory, I still have, mom brain fog. So it was back in, oh goodness, it's 2024. So I want to say 2020, I think I had, yeah, that's about right, because I think I started grad school in 2019. So 2020, I was talking to my my program director from UH, and I had let her know, hey, I'm really interested in working part-time somewhere in the vocational rehabilitation field. But I knew I also didn't want to work somewhere where I could get my internship hours, because I just wanted to explore, right? I wanted to explore different companies, and I wanted to learn. I mean, because if you stay in one place through your 3 semesters, I mean, what are you going to get, right, from sticking with that same audience? And so in 2020, I had reached out to Abilities Unlimited, and I had spoken with the program manager, who is now my boss. She's their director. And, we spoke about what I could do with Abilities Unlimited as a grad student, but not an intern. So there were a lot of, fine lines that we had to say, like what I could do that wouldn't interfere with what I was learning in my internship. So I started with them right before the summer of 2020. And then after my practicum was done with IMOA, I had went into my internship 1 with a workers' compensation industry. It was private for profit, called Vocational Management Consultants. And what I loved about them was all of their counselors were, they had their certification in rehabilitation counseling and licensure in mental health counseling. And I was like, holy Toledo, I thought that was it for me. I was like, I'm going to work here the rest of my life. And I loved it. I mean, aside from really getting yelled at from attorneys and adjusters, I loved it. Because I got to experience a lot of the similar one-on-one type of counseling that I learned from IMUA and Wahiwa Health. And then I was able to help develop a employment plan with them, but what I found really that kind of drove me away from focusing in workers' compensation was the timeline, and then also the audience with attorneys. And it was just because when you're working with a insurance carrier like that for workers' comp, you're very limited to the amount of time that you can spend with your clients. And I felt really rushed. When you have them from day one, you're only supposed to be in a certain part of their plan for, X amount of months or X amount of weeks. And I really felt like because of that time frame that I had, I wasn't able to really focus on helping the clients, build up the skills that they really needed to do to help them get a job. And so, I was still working with Abilities Unlimited. And then, you know, when I got pregnant with little Allie, you know, I was like, okay, I think I need to cut back a little bit on the amount of work I'm doing, you know, because it was just so much at one time. And I actually resigned from Abilities Unlimited, and I decided to work with vocational management consultants and do an internship with them. Um, but as I started feeling, you know, where my passion was with, you know, not being constricted by that time and everything like that, you know, I was in touch with, you know, my previous boss from Abilities Unlimited, and I was telling her like, you know, this was over the summer already after my daughter was born, and I was telling her, you know, as much as I loved being able to focus on mental health counseling and disability adjustment and vocational rehabilitation counseling all at once, I really felt like the time frame from that setting really drove me away from my passion in that industry. And so she was like, "Well, who's to say you can't focus on mental health while you're working with our clientele?" You know, because I don't have my licensure in mental health counseling, right? I don't have my NBCC. And so she was like, "Well,
Not
who's
yet.
to say that you can't do it?" Not yet. You know, so I tell people, right, that I'm working with, like, I'm not a licensed mental health counselor. I don't have my certification, but this is really important to me. So whenever I do have individuals that come to me that, you know, have extreme bouts of anxiety or depression or PTSD, really a lot of the things that I got the chance to focus with in my previous practicum and internships, right? I explained to them, although I'm not licensed in that way, this is really important to me. And I utilize the skills that I gained from you folks and from VMC, and I use it with my current clients now.
I love that. You know what? You said something. I had to write it down because I thought it was cool because we're talking about like your internship experience and how that led to graduation and then
Hmm.
eventually led to where you work at now, right? And you're on your career path there. Before I get to the question I wrote down, let me ask you at this point, you know, now that you've been out of school for some years, been in the workforce for a bit, and then, you know, with all the other experiences that you had through the educational path, share with us maybe the first couple of things that popped to mind, first two things, like
Hmm.
a really positive, impactful thing from a mentor, you know, something you learned from a mentor, maybe, you know, two really impactful things that pop in your head.
Yeah. So, you know, growing up, I was always afraid of making mistakes. And
Sure.
throughout internship and practicum, right, my supervisors through that time, they had really put into perspective how okay it was to make a mistake, right? And so now this is one of the biggest things that I've learned is you can't get better, right? You can't grow, you can't learn if you don't make mistakes. And so even though I've been out of school for, gosh, 2 years, almost 2 years now is when I graduated. You know, yes, I am a profession in the field, but I'm not what I like to say, an actual professional, because there's always something to learn. You know, so
Mm.
I say yes, like, you know, I am a vocational education counselor, or yes, I am the employment team supervisor, but I'm still learning myself. And it's just because our industry is always changing. You know, foundations and laws will pretty much always stay the same. But when it comes to, um, you know, developing better relationships with your clients, or even discovering, you know, what we do for vocational rehab counselors, right? There's so much that has changed just from 2 years ago when I first graduated to now, like technology, resume building, job developing, all of that has changed in just 2 years, which is why I say it's just a constant learning experience, and it's okay to make mistakes, because if you're not making the mistakes or you're not asking the questions, how are you going to learn?
Can I ask you about that? Because would you say the reason you wouldn't classify yourself as a professional is because you don't feel like you're an expert yet? Is that kind of where that comes from?
I think it's because, mindset wise, like
Yeah.
I'm the expert, right? So if, for example, a huge chunk of our field is we develop these partnerships with employers, right? And
Right.
we talk to them about, why is it beneficial to hire a individual with a disability, right? Because back in the day, they'd say, "Oh, I don't want to work with somebody with a disability. It's a liability
Right.
to us, or how are they going to benefit our company?" And, so through that moment, we were the experts, right? As to explaining what our client strengths are, why they're beneficial to work with them, and that they're not going to be a liability, or they're not going to make the company experience a setback or things like that. So in that case, yes, we are experts, but when it comes to being in the field lifetime, right, or constantly
Mm-hmm.
serving the population, I don't consider myself a professional, only because there's always learning that needs to be done.
I see. Okay. I like that. I like that. It's one of my core principles in my head is to continue to be a student, not a follower,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of great information, but it's the gift and curse of being alive in 2024, right? There's so much information
Hmm.
for us, and then we have to be the ones that filter it all out, and take what makes sense and leave aside the things that maybe don't make sense or we don't agree with, but being aware that that kind of
Hmm.
information exists. So, a lot of the best professionals that I've met, especially the ones that are a little older, my age and up, they are constantly learning. They're
Hmm.
always like a student of their game, of their game, of their craft. And for me, I always really enjoy people that are really into their craft and their
Yeah.
profession, whatever that is. It doesn't, it really doesn't matter if it's, doing mental health services. We meet really great medical folks like the pediatrician guy we talked about earlier, who we love, and I hope to get on the show. I'll talk
Yes.
to him. I
We
love
need
chatting with
to.
him. He's awesome. He's awesome. Or if it's a artist, whether it's a media creation, whether it's video, graphic, whatever, fitness people, like just people who are really into what they do for a living and how they help and impact people. I just like really dig those people. So it's part of the reason why I started this show, so we could just talk about people working at different levels in their professional journey. So it's nice that you're on here because you're, like you said, a couple of years out of school, so you're definitely still an early career. They would
Yeah.
consider you an early career professional. So, but I like where your mindset's at, where you just want to keep adding knowledge and skills and experience. So I'm a fan of that. Right on, Gabby.
Thank you.
So after all that, now the thing I wrote down is I wanted to ask you, so how is it now you're on the other side? You're like supervising interns. Like how
Yes.
cool or how weird is that?
It's different. I mean, I think previously I had a conversation with you about how, when I was just a counselor, all I had to focus on was really my caseload, right? So as a CRP with DVR, so that means community rehabilitation partner, because we're contracted out with Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. Our caseloads are technically a lot smaller than what you would expect from DVR. So our caseload typically, I would say I have maybe 20 people on my caseload right now as the supervisor. But really, when you think about what we do behind the scenes, right? So, as a counselor, as a vocational education counselor, we get the client referred to us from DVR, and they usually have a vocational area of interest already identified. And what we do on our end is, depending on the service, if they're internship route or supported employment, which is that permanent employment, but we offer other services tied to that, like job coaching, to offer more support once they've gotten that job. There's things that we need to do on our end before all of that really happens, right? And that's where we get into like resume building, mock interviewing, um, you know, developing better like self-image and, confidence in themselves. There's a lot of things that we do on our end before they're actually out there in the community. And so, we take really what they want to do, right? Their abilities, but also things that we've identified together that they need to strengthen to make themselves competitive, right? Because we focus on competitive and integration, meaning that they have to be working in a competitive field. So, they have these things called Ability One contracts, and what those are work, they're like they're employment opportunities, but the bulk of the employees there have a disability. And so we don't focus on Ability One contracts because we focus on putting them out into a competitive setting, right? So it could be really anywhere that you see a normal employee. So like Walmart, even doctor's offices, hospitals, food service, right? And then so integration is also having, really integration. It's being in that employment with, individuals who society considers normal, right? And the reason why we seek to strive that is because when we place individuals with a barrier into a competitive and integrated setting, it sets them up to strive for things higher than they necessarily didn't think they could do when they first started coming to see us. And so when I was just, a counselor, right, that's all I had to worry about. And now as a supervisor, right, so we have one, two, three counselors right now on our team, which is pretty small, right? But we have three counselors on our team, and each of them, depending on their strengths and how long they've been in the field, kind of dictates how big their caseload is. So I also, help oversee their cases. So I check in with the staff at least once a week to see how their cases are going. And I'm like that extra support for them, right? So especially when it comes to difficult cases, I try to help the staff problem solve. Instead of being afraid to just shut their case, we help identify ways outside of the box that that we can do to continue support our clients without giving up on them easily. And then we're also contracted out to go into high schools. So this past recent school year, we've been working with 9 different high schools across Oahu. And then we go in and we teach their SPED department employment readiness skills. And so part of the supervisory duties is, I need to go and observe how the counselors are doing with teaching the high schoolers, right? Because what we found was the younger we're able to start with individuals with barriers is, it kind of shows how much they can grow. So if you compare, right, an individual, let's say, who's about to graduate from high school versus an individual who has a barrier, they're most likely in what they call a certification of completion route. But if we start them younger, by the time they are about to exit out of high school, they can have the same abilities and aptitudes as that diploma track student. Or what we're also seeing is if we can start younger than that, right, the high schooler, when that person with the barrier gets into high school, then they don't even need to be in certification route. They have what it takes to be in diploma route, and then they don't have to worry about trying to get their GED later. When they have their diploma, it makes them already 100 times more, applicable and competitive to seek employment when they're ready.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that means, like someone with a barrier? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah.
So, depending on who you talk to in the field, right? They might say someone with a disability or someone with a barrier. And so the reason why I refer to our clientele as individuals with barriers rather than individuals with a disability is because although they have their diagnosed disability, We
Mm-hmm.
focus on the abilities that they have and the abilities that they can have. And so when we focus on that word barrier, right, we think about, okay, what accommodations do these individuals need to overcome their barrier so that way
Mm.
they can complete work tasks as still the same as a normal employee. And so that's what we see is as long as they have the right support and the right accommodations while they're on the job, they're able to perform the tasks just as okay as another employee can do.
Right. Like work productivity. It also sounds like to
Yes.
me, not only is there a lot of education to help out your clients, but I gotta believe there's a lot of education for the work sites, right? The employers,
Hmm. There
because a
is.
lot of them are not in your field. So
Yeah.
tell us about kind of that, that.
Yeah. So, we've had some employers where we've done trainings with their human resources team.
Sure.
Um, and so most recently, we actually had placed a few um deaf and hard of hearing individuals into a work site. And
Hmm.
so what we had done was we had gotten sign language interpreters, American Sign Language interpreters who came in and met with us and their HR team to train everybody on some of the common ASL, types of greetings, right, that they can use to help strengthen the relationship between them and the client that they're working with.
Yeah.
Um, and then while we're in what we call that job development phase, where, we're working with the client to, to pretty much place them right in their vocational area of interest. When we go out and make a partnership with an employer, right, we're doing that um, pretty much all the time in person. I mean, back when it was COVID, it was a lot different because we weren't able to. But now that the world is opening back up, we're able to do that again. And so, we're able to go in and see what the support is like, making sure that the environment in itself is a safe place. And this is thinking, okay, does our client have some type of physical limitation? Are they using a wheelchair?
Hmm.
Do they
Hmm.
have maybe a visual impairment, right? Something like that, where we're able to kind of scope out the area to make sure that it's a safe space. If it's something small, like, you know, um, let's say they have a visual impairment and we know that they need a font size of maybe 24 versus the standard 11, then we go in and we talk to employers about creating new pamphlets or, depending on where they're at, right? Um, Creating like new posters or things like that that the client needs to see, like fire evacuation, stuff like that, making it big enough so that way our clients with visual impairments can see them. And so, we go in and we know what types of accommodations our clients need. And with that, we help spread knowledge about working with individuals with barriers. So we talk about our specific clients' abilities, their strengths, what they can do to help benefit the employer. Because we think of it in many ways, right? We're not just doing it to get our clients a job. We're doing it because it's not just beneficial for our client to get that work experience, but it's also going to be beneficial for the employer, right? So they're always bringing on a new person because it's a benefit to the company, right? When you think of it from a business standpoint, it has to benefit the company. And so we have to prove to them that the client can indeed benefit, their customer service or what their missions and values are. And by us explaining, the population that we work with and how they can succeed with the right accommodations and supports is a huge type of, it's a continuous uh type of, I guess, not necessarily training, but it's more of spreading the word to the world.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like as you were describing the nature of your work and even a lot of the intricacies and details of the partnerships and working with the clients with barriers, to be honest, I've not heard that term before. So thank you very much for educating me on that. And I just feel like I just think of also myself, right? I'm not, even though we're in behavioral health or mental health is a broad thing,
Mhm.
like you're in this particular area right? Or subspecialty, we want to call it, or specialty, whatever we want to call it. So it sounds like to me, if you're talking to employers, they it's really going to be out of left field for them.
Yes.
So I got to imagine, educate, like you said, spreading the word, letting people know, providing some education and support for the employers and the quote unquote normal employees. So it sounds like so you guys can find a good fit for the employer and also your guys' clients.
For sure. Yes. It's really always, right? All perspectives that we're looking at. And so, there's been times where, even though it's not as bad as how it was like 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, back in the 1900s, right? We're seeing lots of improvement. There are still a lot of people that I come across that have that mindset, right? And so sometimes, we have to also let them know, hey, that's a very offensive term that you're using. And, I'll give an example. A couple years ago, we had partnered with a grocery store. And
an
we
unnamed
had
grocery
one,
store.
yes,
Yep.
an unnamed grocery store. And, we had a client who really wanted to seek employment with them, because they wanted to do courtesy clerk stuff. And, one of our counselors had went in and, was talking to the hiring manager, who was actually a new one. So it wasn't a manager that we had previously worked with. It was just a location that we previously worked with. And that new manager, said, well, I don't want a mongrel working with me. And so my counselor came back to me and was like, hey, you're like, the hiring manager called our clients mongrels. And I was like, holy moly, like, it just surprised me that some people out there, still use those terms or maybe even think individuals with barriers are still identified that way, because usually we'll have something a little less offensive, because for example, like someone in a wheelchair, you would just simply say, hey, some like XYZ uses a wheelchair. Do you have a ramp? Right. But then the old term was, oh, well, XYZ is wheelchair bound, so we need a ramp. Right. So it's like stuff like that where, we help spread the word on how to properly identify somebody or, talk about how to label something. Right. But when it comes to more offensive words like that term mongrel, it's like, well, where did this word come from? And then it's also, okay, for that person, we really have to educate them, right? Like, okay, what do you think a mongrel is? Do you think that person right there is a mongrel just because maybe, you see that they have Down syndrome or something, right? And so it's really educating someone at that point. And depending on what we get, right? If that person is willing to actually listen and change their perspective about somebody with a barrier, we'll continue with developing that partnership. But there's also been times when someone's like, no, they shut the door or they shut off and they say, nope, it's not going to work out. I'm never hiring somebody with a barrier or with a disability. To us, it's, we try to spread the word, we try to spread the knowledge, but we can't change everyone's perspective. And if someone is, constantly saying, no, like, I don't see any positives to working with anybody with a disability, it's okay, now we're just setting our client to go in to work with somebody who won't really care about them, because, for us, we want to work with a company who's supportive, who cares about us, right? And we want the exact same for our clients.
Yeah, like you said, a safe space for your clients, and then everybody gets a chance to thrive, right? Not just the client, but also the coworkers there, the team there, the company itself. Actually, this topic leads me into something I was going to ask you about anyhow, which is, so for those of us that are not, consistently working with people with barriers and don't have a lot of experience, what do you think, now are like, say like the top 2 or 3 misconceptions about people with barriers?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say the first, right, is can they come off the system? So, a lot of the individuals that we start, providing services for, they're already receiving SSI, SSDI food
Assistance of some
stamps,
sort.
right?
Yeah.
Yes. And so, there's that misconception that, they'll forever be on the system because they can't make a livable wage.
Mm.
And so a lot of it actually is, we do our part of, educating not just the client, but the support system that they have. And a lot of times it's like family about, hey, we'll sign you up for benefits planning, or we'll refer you back to your DVR counselor for benefits planning. So you folks can see, this is how much you make a month from benefits. But if you were able to work full time, this is how much would get deducted from benefits, but how much income you'll actually have. And from there, we're able to identify and show that, yes, our clients can make a livable wage and not have to rely on the benefits that they're receiving from the government. A lot of it too is another misconception I would say is they can't live independently, right? They're always going to live with mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, or sibling, or someone along those lines. And actually, one of the things that we hit in on our, it's called Jumpstart, where we go out into the high school, and during our summer program at Camp Erdman is independent living. And, it's to introduce, right, the skills necessary on what it takes to live independently, or even if you have roommates, right, identifying what types of expectations that you're going to have with your roommates and stuff like that. We definitely see that's a huge misconception that someone with a barrier can't live by themselves, or they can't live with their friends and family. I would say those are the top two. I mean,
Top two.
definitely, yeah, definitely. Or even, I would even say someone with a barrier can't go to college. I also have, I've had, some parents, right, where their child, who's a young adult already, right, say like, oh, well, my child wants to go to college, like they want to go to UH Manoa and get a bachelor's degree. And, I have to ask them, well, what's stopping them, or what's stopping you from believing in them, right? And that's where the whole accommodations and support, just like how it does with working out in the field, comes into play. Because if they have the proper accommodations and support while in school, they can definitely get a degree. I've worked with a lot of individuals who have bachelor's degrees and master's degrees in some that, I think is even harder than the field that I work in. I mean, I had a client that had her bachelor's degree in biomechanics.
Oh gosh.
And I was like, what is that?
Right. What is happening with that?
Yeah.
Bio what?
Yeah, I know. I was like, wait, that sounds like two different things now.
Right. You know what?
Yeah.
That's great. So on the other end, as simple as you can make it, what do you think is the best, like one, maybe two pieces of advice for the rest of us, quote unquote, when maybe like thinking about, someone with a barrier, or, whether we have a coworker that's coming in that way, or even if we're just strangers on the street, right? Or we're at an airport, we're at the grocery store, and we happen to come across, someone we perceive as having a disability, or someone with barriers. What do you think's like some real practical advice you could give to the rest of us who aren't as used to, being around someone with those things?
So, I would say one of the top things that we see out in society, let's say if we're out in the grocery store, is, we see someone with a cane, or we see somebody in a wheelchair, right? Or maybe with a broken arm or something like that, right? Our human instinct is to go, let me get that for you. Right? It's, let me open the door for you. Let me push you out the door. Let me reach that for you. And I would say, right, one of the biggest advice that I can give is ask before you do, right? Because for somebody who has
I almost thought you were going to say, don't even grab it for them. I was like, Okay.
No.
I'm sorry.
I
I
mean,
thought that's
you
what
can
you
do
were
that.
gonna say. I'm like, there's no way that's the advice, right? Okay, got it. I'm
No.
just playing. Ask before.
Ask before you do, right? And
Got it.
that's because it gives the individual an option, right? If they actually need assistance, they'll either ask you or they'll be very appreciative. Oh, thank you for asking. Yes, actually, can you reach this from the shelf, for me or something like that, right? Because and this is also because not just working and helping individuals with a barrier find employment, but I've also had coworkers with a disability, right? And
Mhm.
there's been times where even I was like, "Oh, let me get that for you, or let me read this for you," right? And so, through time, right, they would just say, "Well, actually, Gabby, can you just get my assistive technology so I can read it myself, or can you maybe bring it closer to me?" Right? So instead of doing it for them, you ask, "Well, can I do this for you, or what can I do to help you reach your goal?" Right? Ask before you do. Um, and then I would say another advice I can give is also letting them advocate for themselves. I mean, they're their biggest advocate, right? Because, us in the field as experts, we can advocate for them while, they're developing the skills or while we are job developing. But really, because we're temporary, right? Once they work and once they've worked for X amount of months, or we find that they're working, independently and they're building the natural supports, the biggest person that can advocate for an individual is yourself. And so I would say letting them self advocate, and expressing their needs and accommodations is a huge thing too.
That's excellent advice. I think that's very tangible, right? Like easy to understand for the rest of us. I think especially that first one, I'm really glad for that because although maybe people who watch the show don't know this about me, I'm like almost 6 feet tall and I'm really strong. I'm like half Samoan. I work out a lot.
Yep.
And so it's kind of almost expected sometimes when you're like a medium to bigger guy. Like if you see someone kind of struggling to say grab something, especially taller, right? Here in Hawaii, most people are very short, so I'm tall in
Yep.
Hawaii. So yeah, like you said, you kind of see you would just grab and go, right? Or move
Hmm.
the thing out of the way, or bring the thing closer or whatever. And we don't even we think as individuals, I'm just doing a nice thing without actually giving the person the option because they might actually be trying to work towards whatever that is, right? So
Hmm.
I'm glad you brought a lot of awareness to that for the rest of us. I'll call it the rest of us, or at least the people who aren't as familiar with
Hmm.
people with disabilities and barriers. So that's some great advice. Thank you for that. Let me shift to this. Since you mentioned becoming a mom a little while back,
Hmm.
how have you been balancing working mom?
It was hard. I mean, it still is. I think every parent can attest to that, regardless of where they are in their career and how old their children are, right? And so, I'd love to share that, when I had gotten pregnant with little Allie, or what I like to call her Allie Bear, is I was in my last semester of grad school, right?
Mhm.
And I was telling my husband, I said, I I really want to have a child early on in my career. And the way how I thought about it was as a entry level counselor or somebody who is still working their way up, in the
Yeah,
industry and stuff,
sure.
it's easier, right? For me, this is how I thought it was or think is, it's easier to like take off, right? If baby gets sick, or even going to child checkups, baby visits, right? All of that is a lot easier to do when you're still working your way up. Because once, if you become like a huge manager or something like that, right? Like, I think it's even harder to be able to take the time off and spend with your family. And I would say there's multiple factors, into being why I'm able to work full time, and be a mom. And it's one, having the foundation as parents, right? So, my husband, he's actually going to school right now. He's finishing his bachelor's degree to become a teacher, and he works full
Yeah,
time,
awesome.
right? Yes, yes. And so, having like, I would say, a schedule is really important, right? Who is gonna wake up and, cook breakfast? Who's gonna bring baby to grandma's house? Who's gonna pick up baby? Who's gonna cook dinner? Who's gonna bathe baby? Wash dishes, things like that, right? It's pretty much, on a day-to-day basis, we have our own roles that we do household wise, but yet we're able to still commit ourselves to being great parents and, for him, go to school. And then working. I don't know if I said working.
Yeah, you
And
did.
I would, yeah, okay, thank you. And then I would also say, having a flexible, like for me, because my boss is very flexible, she's a mom too. And having a understanding and supportive type of community, when it comes to, your work, really, really helps too, because it automatically reduces, if not takes away, a lot of stress. So for example, if Allie gets sick, right, a lot of people are like, well, do I have enough sick days, right, to take
Right.
off to spend with my daughter, or, something like that. But because the support is there, if let's say I don't have a sick day, or, maybe I use it up, or I haven't saved my sick days and stuff because it's by year, what we do with our staff is we allow them to take comp days. And so if they have to take off, let's say on a Monday, Tuesday, because the child is sick, we'll allow them to work, let's say later on a day, on a work day, or even work throughout the weekend to make up for the days that they took off. And that's a huge help too. But it wasn't like this in the beginning, right? Because as a new mom, right, there's a lot of changes that's happening, right? Hormonal wise. I mean,
Right.
moms go haywire as a new mom.
I will take your
And
word for it.
yes, and of course I was like that, right? So, a lot of it is running just off of adrenaline at that point, and I think that's what honestly got me through a huge chunk of her first life, was the adrenaline that I had from being a new mom. But as I started feeling like I was getting burnt out, because, you already said this, Trav, right? A lot of people in our field get burnt out easily. They end up leaving the field because of the burnout. I mean, it's crazy to have somebody who's very passionate in our field and think about what they can do to prevent burnout, because it's kind of inevitable, to not be burnt out or tired when it comes to being in the industry. And so for me, it was being able to communicate that with my family and my boss. And so it was actually just a couple months ago, where, I was feeling really, really burnt out, because I was working a lot at nights. And I was just having this pressure, because there was a lot of added duties that were, you know, being added on to my plate. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't be working through the nights anymore. Like, how am I going to do this? And so I communicated it with my boss. I communicated it with my husband. And I also set boundaries. And I would say boundaries is the most important thing when it comes to balancing being a parent and working, or maybe working and going to school, whatever roles that you have, even if it's just working and being a wife or a husband, right? If you don't have boundaries set up, something in your life is going to overcome that other important piece, and then you're going to feel burnt out. And so, what I had to learn was really prioritize what I had to get done throughout the day. And if it wasn't something like that had a deadline, or something that, I could say for the next day, why work on it at night? And it sounds so easy saying it and maybe hearing it, But I mean, hello,
Sure
I am,
sounds easy,
it
Gabby. Yeah,
sounds,
sure
right?
sounds
It's
easy. Yes,
yes, yes. But it's like, when they say it's easier said than done, right? It takes a lot of commitment to actually
absolutely.
set boundaries. So when I learned how to do that, it made things a lot better.
Gabby, you said so many good things there that I just wanted to jump in and start monologuing about. But man, that was such a great answer. What I will say is I'm glad you brought it around to burnout and
Hmm.
boundaries because I try to remember, and also I'm guilty of someone. I'm someone who works 6 to 7 days a week, so I'm also guilty of letting some of it spill over, taking over.
Hmm.
However you want to say that. But I'm glad you brought it back to burnout because I think what I heard is the way that you've been balancing it is a really nice solution of all the hats that you wear as wife, mom, counselor, supervisor, etc. And like you said, communicating with your support system, right? Work system, home system,
Hmm.
husband system, right? Like all of it, right? Family. And I think there's a lot of value in your answer, because the one way to balance it is you also need a balanced amount of support. That's kind of like what I was envisioning as you were talking, is this
Yeah.
like kind of nice circle of support, where a little bit here and there and here and there. And then of course there's your part, right? Where you have to, like you said, create the boundaries there, and just let it be sometimes, right? You just got to let it be,
Yeah.
which is led us to easier said than done, man. Easier said than done. That's an awesome answer. You know what? Before I get to like my last few kind of wrap up questions of our show,
Hmm.
I really appreciate the amount of information we got about your field and your day-to-day work. Is there a mental health topic? We'll just call that super broad. Is there something within like mental health as a topic, as a field, as a service that we haven't talked about yet that you would like to like expand on or bring up, even if it's out of the blue, we haven't talked about it yet?
We've touched a lot, right, on mental health and why it's important for the behavioral health field. And how, I did my one practice or internship, right, with workers' compensation because the counselors there had both their rehab counseling certification and LMHCs. And I don't remember if I said this, but definitely, even if you're not like an expert in mental health, right? Just
Mm,
knowing really how important mental health is, right? And it's not just for the people that you serve, but also for yourself. Because we're so concerned or we're so focused on, you know, providing services for our clientele or the community that we serve. But, it's if we're not taking care of our mental health, if we're not focusing on ourselves, how are we going to best serve the community?
absolutely. Who takes care of the caretaker?
Mm-hmm.
And that has to start with the caretaker, right? So fantastic. So Gabby, before we get to like the last question and definitely our signature question, I love to take time near the end of our episodes just to share a little bit from my point of view about you, about whoever's on our show. So for sure, I'll just tell you this directly. One of the things I love about you and continue to love about you is your energy and your spirit. I I feel like your heart comes through, and just how great it is, how awesome it is. And I feel like that was very evident, shortly after I met you back in 2017 now. Can you believe it's been that long? It's almost
Yeah.
7 years when
Yep.
you were still working on your bachelor's, if I remember right. You were
Yes.
still you were still in undergrad. And I remember us um, sitting at the receptionist desk at Wahiwa Health, and you were showing me the ropes about like a lot of the things, right? The registration process and all those fine details of taking care of patients and all that. And I just remember feeling lucky, like, man, how nice. This is like my first healthcare coworker. And me and her get to sit at the receptionist desk and meet people and random. If you think about these three kids and there's two boys and a girl, right? I think you know what I'm talking about. They are now adopted. The girl and
Uh-huh. Yes.
I just saw them recently, and we talked about you, Miss Gabby.
Oh
So
my
I just,
gosh.
and we could totally talk more about that, while not recording. But yeah,
Yeah.
and I just have like a lot of great memories of my entry into healthcare, and a lot of that has to do with you. So I got a lot of love in my heart for you, and I'm really glad to have seen and hear more about your journey these years that we've been, coworkers and now friends. So I'm just I'm glad you're on the show, and I'm glad you're in my life.
Thank you so
And
much, Trav. That really
you
means a
bet.
lot.
Thanks, Gabby. I know we've cried a bunch over the
I know.
years.
Yeah,
I know we've cried
literally.
a bunch
Like
over the years.
from being overwhelmed to being happy. Lots of mixed emotions.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? That's from me to person. As like another professional working in the field, professional to professional, worker to worker. What I would say is I love these last couple of years as we've talked, since you've gotten out of school and started working and taking more responsibilities on and abilities. I love how much of an advocate you are, for not just for your field, but also for the clients and for all the clients, all the people out there in our community that have barriers. You just like drop tons of knowledge on us, and I'm just so glad. I'm happy to be associated with you. I find you to be a very strong advocate for your field, your specialty within our field. And I think we look the same direction. That's kind of how I phrase it. We're facing the same direction, right? We want to help people, help our communities, especially those that are less fortunate and get the short end of the stick because of stigma, right? Lack of education. And you touched on a lot of that, with people and the terms. And we also know the really bad terms that we know people still use that we won't repeat here on this show because we're not down for that. So yeah, from one professional to another, I find you to be a really awesome advocate, and I love your work.
Thank you so much, Trav. I
Of
mean,
course.
it really, it's very heartwarming and also surprising, right? Because I mean, when you go through jobs, right, a lot of people don't keep in touch with each other. I mean, it's like, they use it as a stepping stone, right? And then when they resign, it's okay, bye, like,
Right.
and then you move on
Just
with your
happens.
life. Yeah, and there's only literally a handful of people that I've kept in touch with from previous jobs, and you and Doc are, one of the ones in my handful that I've kept in touch with, and it's really a blessing to have been able to keep in touch with you guys because I mean, you folks were the ones that had introduced me to the mental health field and really had helped me shape, to become the counselor that I am today, even though I'm not licensed yet.
Not yet. I'm sure you will be one day. I'm sure you will be.
Yeah. But
Like you
even,
said, early career. It's all good.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, the place that I'm in now, right? I wouldn't have been able to do it without you guys. And even keeping in touch with you guys, like, with the supervisory duties and stuff. I mean, I'm so glad I'm able to text you randomly and just be like, Trav, I need to talk. Like, how do I handle this?
Any and all time. Any and all time. Yeah, anytime. So before I ask you our signature question, let me ask you, is there anything you would like to share, like let's say an event or something, something you want to plug, I guess we could call it, is there anything happening with your company or for, whatever, an event that you or a group that you support, anything you'd like to share, something cool coming up?
Yeah. So actually, every summer we go out to Camp Erdman.
Okay.
And it's called Summer Youth Employment. And so we've been doing it for, this is going to be, I think, the 4th year now.
Very cool.
Where we're able to take transition and young adults out to Camp Erdman. And so it's a 6-week program. And for 2 out of the 6 weeks, it's all rotating because we have 3 tracks that someone is placed in. So for 2 out of the 6 weeks, they're actually living at Camp Erdman in a cabin. And so, it's a boys' cabin and a girls' cabin where they're
Sure.
able to practice the independent living skills. And they're able to work part-time at camp. So they have their own industries set up at camp, right? So they already have like kitchen workers and camp counselors and photography, office work. all of the jobs that are already set out at the YMCA, our interns, our clientele are able to apply and work part-time while they're at camp there. And then we also do seminars where we teach them about financial literacy. And then we do like first aid, CPR. We ask employers to come out. Which hint, hint, I'll be talking to you about it later.
Loud and clear. I hear that
introducing, right? Having employers introduce like the vast amount and different fields, industries that really adults can choose from, right? When it comes to figuring out their vocational areas of interest. And then while they're not at Camp Erdman, they're also doing a lot of virtual projects together. So it's either, like planning for graduation, or making a slideshow for graduation, like being a part of that graduation committee. And then also serving as like a mentor to the other people that's going to be going to Camp Erdman. And so we're actually prepping for that. So, if any of, I guess, your guys' clients that you work with already has like a DVR counselor, feel free to shoot them my way and I can help them through like the application process.
Very cool. So Abilities Unlimited runs this program, the one that you just described. And where can people find out more information about that?
So it's not on our website yet, okay. But I would say getting them in touch with me would probably be the best way to learn more about it. And then we are going to be in the process of releasing applications to DVR. So if they do have a DVR counselor, then they can also talk to their counselor about it too. And then they get paid. Last thing I forgot to mention is through the 6 weeks, they get paid. Yep. Yeah. So everything that we do, whether it's Camp Erdman or other internships, we always pay our clients.
Okay. So leading into our last question, our show is called Listen to Your Heart. So Gabby, when you listen to your heart, what is it saying? Well,
it's saying that, it's saying that I'm doing a great job.
Awesome.
And I mean, it's like great that I get to laugh about that, but it's like I said, right, having that like positive self-image of yourself is really, really hard to do until you figure out how you can best think positively about yourself, and so as I started developing these boundaries, right, when it came to work and personal life, I definitely found that having that better, right, like self-image, but even better thoughts of like myself as not just like work-wise, like a supervisor or counselor, but being a good mom and a good wife, has definitely been a lot better.
Excellent. That's Gabby Chu. Thanks for joining our show.
And thank you for tuning in to Listen to Your Heart. If you'd like to help our mission, check out the link in our bio to visit our store or make a donation to our nonprofit, Imua Heart. Like, comment, and share with friends and family. Subscribe for future episodes, and together we can Imua towards a happier, healthier Hawaii. Until next time, mahalo.